Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into some pretty wild claims floating around online about big changes happening at the FBI and the Department of Justice. The main source for this is a video on Sky News Australia's YouTube channel, and they are really making some bold assertions. So get ready, because by the end of this, you'll have a way better idea of what's being said and what it could all mean.
Yeah, it's a really interesting landscape we're looking at here. The claims are definitely presented as like a huge reset within these institutions, a kind of cleaning house, if you will.
Right. And they jump right into it. The video claims that Kash Patel has been sworn in as the new FBI director. I mean, that's a pretty big deal, right?
Absolutely. Especially when you think about Patel's background. He's been a trial attorney, a public defender, and had a significant role in the Trump administration. And the video frames him as someone who uncovered what they call illegal and immoral shenanigans at the FBI, particularly related to that whole Russia collusion investigation.
Okay, so let's break that down a little.
Yeah.
What exactly are these shenanigans they're talking about?
Well, they focus on this one specific example involving text messages between some FBI and DOJ officials who are working on the Russia investigation. The video actually calls them the Lovebirds texts. And they claim that these texts show a clear bias against Trump, even hinting at this attempt to create an insurance policy to kind of stop his presidency.
Whoa, it sounds like something right out of a movie.
Yeah, it definitely has that kind of dramatic feel to it. It's really important to remember, though, that these interpretations of the text messages are really controversial, and there are a lot of different opinions out there on how important they actually are.
Okay, so there's more to the story than just what's in this video.
Definitely. You always have to consider the different sides in the bigger picture. But in the story the video is telling, these texts are really important in establishing Patel as this fighter for truth and justice. They say he's on this mission to clean house and bring back the FBI's good reputation. They even quote him saying, "Bring it on," when talking about how the media attacks him.
He definitely sounds like someone who's not backing down from a challenge. And this idea of him shaking things up is made even bigger. By this plan, he supposedly has to move 7,000 FBI agents out of Washington, D.C. Why is that such a big deal?
Well, the video kind of suggests that these agents are more worried about getting ahead in their careers than actually, fighting crime. So by moving them, Patel wants to get them to focus on what they call actual crime. The video is suggesting that whatever they're doing in Washington isn't as important or is maybe even politically motivated.
So they're portraying D.C. as this kind of swamp full of bureaucrats who are just looking out for themselves. And Patel is the one coming in to drain it.
That's one way to look at it, for sure. And it fits into this broader narrative we've been hearing for a while now, this idea of a deep state working against certain political goals.
That's interesting. So it's not just about Patel, right? The video also brings up Pam Bondi as the new Attorney General. What's her role in all of this?
That's where things get even more interesting. The video claims that Bondi is getting ready to release Jeffrey Epstein's client list. They even quote her saying that she's reviewing it at President Trump's request. And on top of that, they mention that she's also reviewing files related to JFK and MLK.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot to take in. Just the possibility of Epstein's client list being released is huge.
Yeah.
And then you add in the JFK and MLK files, which people have been fascinated with for decades. It's like opening a can of worms.
Yeah, it definitely has that feeling of uncovering these big secrets, which really plays into that fascination people have with conspiracies and hidden truths. But it's super important to keep a balanced perspective. Even if some of these claims end up being true, it doesn't necessarily mean that there was a deliberate cover-up or that people were acting with bad intentions behind everything.
That's a really good point. We can't jump to conclusions just because something looks suspicious or fits into a certain narrative.
Exactly. It's important to consider that there could be mistakes made by people, or just the complicated nature of how things work in government. And of course, people can interpret events in different ways.
So as listeners, how do we handle all this complicated information and possible misinformation? It's easy to get swept up in all the drama, but we need to think critically about what we're hearing.
Oh, absolutely. I think one of the most important things is to be aware of where the information is coming from and any biases they might have. Every media outlet, every person sharing information, they all have their own perspective that influences how they present things. Asking yourself, why is this person telling me this? What's their angle? Can be really helpful.
It's like being a detective, right? looking
Yeah.
for clues and figuring out people's motives.
Exactly. And another super important thing is to look for multiple viewpoints. Don't just rely on one source for your information. Compare different perspectives,
Yeah.
read analyses from different experts, and try to get a more complete understanding of the situation.
And I guess it's also about questioning what we see and hear. Just because something is presented as a fact doesn't automatically make it true.
Exactly. It's good to be a little skeptical, to ask for evidence,
Mhm.
and to think about other possible explanations. Don't be afraid to challenge what you're told, even if it's coming from someone who seems like an authority figure.
This reminds me of that line at the end of the Sky News video
Hmm.
about sending FBI agents to Hollywood. What did you think about that?
Yeah, that was an interesting addition, wasn't it? Almost like a little wink to the audience, implying a link between the FBI and the entertainment industry,
Oh.
maybe hinting at some kind of hidden scandal there.
Yeah, it plays into that whole idea of Hollywood being this secretive world with its own secrets.
It's a subtle way to connect this story to what people already think about Hollywood and get them speculating even more.
So it's not just about presenting information.
Hmm.
It's also about framing it in a way that grabs the audience
Yeah.
and maybe even reinforces certain beliefs they already have.
Absolutely. The way information is presented, the language used, the visuals they use, all of these things help shape the story and affect how people understand it.
It really shows how powerful the media is and how it can influence what people think.
And it highlights how important media literacy is. We need to understand how information is put together and how to look at it critically.
So we've talked about potential consequences, being aware of sources seeking out different viewpoints, and critically evaluating information. But what does all of this actually mean for us? What's the big picture here?
I think what we're seeing reflects a bigger trend, a growing distrust in institutions, and a change in how people are getting and understanding information.
Yeah.
It feels like we're constantly bombarded with information,
Yeah,
and it's hard to know what to believe anymore.
it really does.
Yeah, and that's a really tough challenge in the world today. We're getting hit with information from all directions, and it can feel overwhelming to try and sort through it all and figure out what's true and what's not.
So how do we navigate all of this? What can we do to be smarter about the information we take in?
Well, first and foremost, I think it's about developing a healthy dose of skepticism. Don't just believe everything you read or hear, even if it's coming from a source you usually trust. Question the information, look for evidence, and consider other perspectives.
It's almost like we have to become our own fact checkers.
Exactly. And there are tools and resources out there to help us do that. Reputable fact-checking websites, media literacy organizations, even just taking the time to compare information from different sources. All of that can make a huge difference.
So it's about being proactive and taking charge of our own information intake.
Absolutely. And another really important part is recognizing our own biases. We all have them, and they can unconsciously affect how we understand information. Being aware of our biases can help us look at information in a more critical and objective way.
It's like that saying, we see what we want to see.
Exactly. And sometimes what we want to see is something that agrees with what we already believe, even if it's not completely accurate. So challenging our own assumptions and being open to viewpoints that are different from our own, that's really important.
So skepticism, fact-checking, and being aware of our biases are all key. What else can we do to make our way through this maze of information?
I think it's also helpful to think about the motivations behind the information being presented. Who's sharing it? What are they trying to do? Are they trying to inform, persuade, entertain, or manipulate? Understanding the intent behind the message can give you a lot of valuable context.
That makes a lot of sense. It's kind of like understanding the author's purpose when you're reading something.
Exactly. And lastly, I think it's really important to remember that information is always changing. What might be considered true today could be proven wrong tomorrow as new evidence comes out. So stay curious, stay open to new information, and be willing to change your understanding as needed.
That's great advice. It's like this deep dive isn't just about understanding these specific claims about the FBI and DOJ, but about giving ourselves the tools to navigate the whole world of information out there.
That's a great way to put it. It's about becoming informed and critical thinkers
Hmm.
in a time when information is everywhere, but also often unreliable.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what's the main takeaway you want our listeners to leave with?
I think the most important thing is to be engaged, but thoughtfully engaged. Don't just passively absorb information, question it, analyze it, and connect the dots yourself. The truth is often complicated and nuanced, and it's through critical thinking and open-minded exploration that we can really understand the world around us.
Well said. And on that note, we've reached the end of this section of our deep dive. But before we move on, I want to leave you with one final thought to consider. Given these claims and the bigger trends we've discussed, how might the relationship between institutions, media, and the public continue to change in the future? And what does that mean for the future of truth and trust in our society? Those are some big questions to think about. But we hope this deep dive has given you some tools and perspectives to help you navigate those complexities. Stick with us. We'll be right back after a short break. Okay, so we've got this whole narrative of like a power shift, with people like Patel and Bondi maybe leading the way on these big revelations. But let's really dig into what this could all mean. Like, if these claims are actually true, what kind of impact could they have?
Well, if Patel really is serious about changing the FBI, and Bondi actually does release that Epstein client list, the consequences could be huge. We could see a domino effect across the legal system, the political world, and even society as a whole.
Just imagine the headlines.
Right.
New investigations, maybe even prosecutions. It could completely change how people view these institutions.
Exactly. Public trust in law enforcement and the government could be seriously affected, whether it's for better or worse. And we can't forget that the Epstein case especially is connected to some really powerful people in different areas.
Yeah, we're talking about some potentially huge names being exposed. And then you add in those JFK and MLK files that Bondi's supposedly looking at, which have had people captivated for decades. It's like opening Pandora's box.
It definitely feels that way, like we're about to uncover all these long-held secrets, which really plays into people's fascination with conspiracies and hidden truths. But we have to be careful and approach this with a balanced view. Even if some of these claims turn out to be true, it doesn't automatically mean there was some big cover-up or that people were acting with bad intentions all along.
Right. We can't just assume something's wrong or jump to conclusions.
Exactly. We have to think about the possibility of human error, the complicated way things work in government, and how people can just interpret the same events differently.
So how do we as listeners deal with all this messy information and possible misinformation?
That's a great question. It's so easy to get caught up in all the excitement.
Yeah.
But it's crucial to think critically about what we're hearing.
Totally. So how do we do that?
Well, I think one of the most important things is to be aware of where the information is coming from and what their biases might be. Every media outlet, every person sharing information, they all have their own perspective that influences how they present things. Asking yourself, why is this person telling me this, can be really helpful.
It's like being a detective, right?
Exactly. And another super important thing is to look for different viewpoints. Don't just rely on one source for your information. Read articles from different experts and try to get a more complete picture of what's going on.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And I guess it's also about not just accepting what we see and hear as fact, even if it's presented that way.
Yeah, exactly. It's always good to be a little skeptical, to ask for evidence, and to think about other possible explanations. Don't be afraid to question what you're told, even if it's coming from someone who seems like an authority.
This makes me think about that part at the end of the Sky News video, where they talk about sending those FBI agents to Hollywood. What was your take on that?
It was interesting, wasn't it? It felt almost like a little joke. A way of suggesting a connection between the FBI and the entertainment industry, and maybe hinting at some secret scandal there.
Yeah, it plays into that image of Hollywood as this mysterious world with its own hidden truths.
It's a subtle way to connect their story to what people already think about Hollywood and get them speculating even more.
So it's not just about presenting information, it's about framing it in a way that gets the audience hooked.
Exactly. And all those things matter. The way they present the information, the language they use, the visuals they choose, all of that helps shape the narrative and how people understand it.
It really shows how much power the media has in shaping public opinion.
And it highlights how important media literacy is these days. We need to be able to understand how information is created and presented and to analyze it critically.
Absolutely. So we've talked about the possible consequences, the importance of knowing your sources, looking for different viewpoints, and critically evaluating information. But what does all this really mean for us? What's the bigger picture here?
Well, I think what we're seeing is part of a bigger trend, a growing lack of trust in institutions and a shift in how people get and interpret information.
Yeah, it feels like we're always drowning in information, and it's hard to know what to believe.
It really is, and it's a challenge we all face in today's world. We're bombarded with information from everywhere, and it can be totally overwhelming to try to sort through it all and figure out what's true and what's not.
So how do we even begin to navigate all of this? What can we do to be smarter about the information we take in?
I think the first thing is to develop a healthy sense of skepticism. You know, don't just automatically believe everything you read or hear, even if it's from a source you usually trust.
So even if it's something you see on your favorite news site or from an expert you really like.
Exactly. Question the information, look for evidence, and try to consider different perspectives.
It's like we have to become our own fact checkers.
Right. And the good news is there are tools and resources out there to help us do that.
Hmm.
Things like reputable fact-checking websites, media literacy organizations. Even just taking a few minutes to compare information from different sources can make a big difference.
So it's about being proactive and taking charge of our own information intake.
Definitely. And another really important part is recognizing our own biases. We all have them,
Hmm.
and they can unconsciously affect how we see and understand information. Being aware of our own biases can help us approach information in a more critical and objective way.
It's like that saying, we see what we want to see.
Exactly. And
Yep.
sometimes what we want to see is something that confirms our existing beliefs, even if it's not completely accurate. So it's important to challenge our own assumptions and be open to viewpoints that are different from our own.
So skepticism, fact-checking, and bias awareness are all key. Got it. What else can we do to navigate this maze of information?
Well, I think it's helpful to consider the motivations behind the information being presented. Who's sharing this? Why are they sharing it? What's their agenda? Are they trying to inform, persuade, entertain, or manipulate? Understanding the intent behind the message can give you some really valuable context.
That makes a lot of sense. It's kind of like trying to figure out why an author wrote a book.
Exactly. And finally, I think it's crucial to remember that information is constantly evolving and changing. What might be considered true today could be proven false tomorrow with new evidence. So stay curious, stay open to new information, and be willing to adjust your understanding as you learn more.
That's great advice. It's like this whole deep dive isn't just about understanding these specific claims about the FBI and DOJ, but about learning how to be smarter about all the information we're exposed to every day.
I think that's a really good way to put it. It's about becoming informed and critical thinkers in a world where information is both abundant and often unreliable.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the most important thing you want our listeners to take away from this?
I think the key takeaway is to be engaged, but to be thoughtfully engaged. Don't just passively consume information. Question it, analyze it, and connect the dots yourself. The truth is often complex and nuanced, and it's through critical thinking and open-minded exploration that we can really understand the world around us.
Well said. That's a great point to end on. So that wraps up our deep dive for today. We hope you found this exploration insightful and thought-provoking. And as always, we encourage you to keep questioning, keep learning, and keep engaging with the world around you. Thanks for listening.